All right, well, welcome to Utilizing MC Squared, webinar focused on understanding the Health Sector Coordinating Council's model contract language for MedTech cybersecurity, or MC Squared. We're fortunate to have with us today some expert panelists who were involved in putting this tool together and over the course of a couple of years working it through, and got a good conversation with them to show you, and then we'll take Q&A afterwards. You can use the chat function here on the webinar, on the Zoom interface there, to post your questions. You can do that at any time during the panel discussion. Anytime the questions occurred to you, you can do it now. Please make full use of that. And when we get to the Q&A time, I will read those questions out more or less in the order that they come in, and we'll get the panelists' reactions. So let's get started with the conversation. And thank you for being with us. To start us off, I think I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourself, just who you are, name, title, and how you came to be involved with the model contract effort. And Greg, I'd like to start with you, and I'd like you to, if you would, say a little bit about the Hscc and the work that's going on there.
Certainly. I'm Greg Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Health Sector Coordinating Council's Cybersecurity Working Group, which is a coalition, a cross-sector healthcare coalition of device manufacturers, hospital systems, health IT companies, plans and payers, pharmaceutical companies, public health. And we are all coalesced around the joint mission of coordinating on cybersecurity, information sharing, best practices, incident response, and to do that cooperatively, collaboratively with our government partners, primarily Health and Human Services and the Department of Homeland Security and other government agencies. So this is, it is based on a national strategy for protecting our nation's critical infrastructure, and healthcare is one of 16 designated, federally designated critical infrastructure sectors, just like financial services and telecommunications and electricity and water and transportation, everything that the public and the nation depends upon. And so we are part of a national public-private partnership. There's a sector coordinating council for every critical sector. And we look very strategically over the long term about what can we be doing differently in business operations, in our interdependencies, in public policy, whether it's regulation or legislation, that can facilitate our achievement of better security and resiliency for the sector. And the Cybersecurity Working Group is broken out into now 13 task groups that are focused on some very specific aspects of healthcare cybersecurity. Things such as improving medical device security, which is what we're talking about today, better cybersecurity workforce in the healthcare sector. What about supply chain security, third-party risk, cybersecurity risk? What about better information sharing? So there's a whole range of issues that we need to tackle. And what we are talking about today is the Model Contracts Task Group, which is really born out of the understanding that a lot of the disagreements or confusion between medical device manufacturers and their customers, the health providers, is often based at the very beginning, is to unclear terms and cybersecurity terms and conditions, or non-existent cybersecurity terms and conditions in contracts between the two when a purchase is being made. So we assembled a pretty strong group, co-led by Mayo Clinic, by Siemens Healthineers, and by Premier Inc., the group purchasing organization, to really get that cross-sector collaborative view as to what should be the most commonly used cybersecurity terms and conditions in a model contract, and use that as a starting point, as a reference for the rest of the community.
Great. Michelle.
Hello, thank you. My name is Michelle Bentley and I work for Mayo Clinic. I have worked there for 25 years, all of that time in information technology and then information security since around 2013, at which time the lens started shining on medical device security and where we were. So a lot of my time back then was doing high-level assessments. And one of the most important things then was partnering with the vendors of these medical devices and having those crucial conversations about the cybersecurity landscape or position of the devices themselves. And they spanned very broadly between thinking it was a medical device, why are we even talking about cybersecurity, to being a little bit more mature and utilizing a lot of the Windows platforms, or such as an example, that were being built in a more security savvy position of knowing that patching needed to take place. So in essence, that really broad view. As we looked at purchasing devices, we found that the most opportune time to talk about that position and cybersecurity was at the point of purchasing and getting them before, and really looking at the contract either to stand on its own or be part of the business associate agreement or the master service agreement, whatever made sense. But each and every contract took extensive time and negotiation, depending upon how the devices were built, what they were intended for, what the intent of the MDM was as compared to the intent of the HDO usage, and having that conversation marry. And so we looked at it as, if it's taking us this much time and we have FDA guidance and we have ISO and we have NIST, then why are all these organizations having to go through that themselves as well, that duplication? And many of the patients that have a lot of their services at smaller healthcare organizations throughout the country, how are those smaller healthcare facilities supposed to be able to fund that type of legal and have the security department, right, to be able to have those discussions, any type of assumed mitigations in place or whatever, as we go forward. And so thus, as we participated in a lot of industry work groups, as we participated in Hscc and with our peers in the industry, there were a few of us that decided to try to tackle, could we come up with commonalities between our contract language and see how much of it is similar, and maybe produce a document that could be utilized by all and a starting point. And through that presentation that was done with Kaiser Permanente and Cleveland Clinic, Greg happened to be at that presentation and approached us to really take this on within Hscc and have that broad base that Hscc has for that full participation to make this product even stronger. And so being able to participate in that and have that door through Hscc in order to participate, I think has been the key to the success of the document and getting this product out as a first draft. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Axel.
Thank you. Yeah, so Axel Worth, I'm the Chief Security Strategist at a startup company out of San Diego called MedCrypt. So we deal with security technologies and tools for medical devices and medical device manufacturers. I am involved in a number of Hscc projects, but actually was not involved in the model contract project from the beginning. But once it was posted for public comment, I did have a number of hopefully valuable comments to add and feedback to the team. And I'm certainly looking forward to helping with a future version of the document. As we all know, things need to develop in cybersecurity. Things are never static. I want to reiterate some of the points Michelle was making, but I think the greatest value of the model contract language is really that it standardizes at least a core set of cybersecurity requirements, both technical as well as procedural requirements, and standardizes a good deal of the relationship between the device manufacturer or distributor and the buying healthcare organization. That makes the life easier, not only for the buyer, for the healthcare organization, because they know where to start and what to pick up as a reference point, which is the model contract language. But it also makes life much easier for device manufacturers, because they're now getting at least a core set of questions from every hospital. Right? Will every hospital have a few additional questions? Yeah, I would think so. But every situation is unique. Every risk profile is unique. But again, getting the solid stake in the ground and getting something established that at least in its core is now uniform, I think is extremely valuable. And congratulations to the team that developed the model contract language.
Thank you. And Chris.
Christopher Gates. I am the Director of Product Security for Velentium. We are a medical device manufacturer, but we're also a consultancy for other MDMs to use to help get their device developed and into the marketplace. In my case, what I work on and my team, we work on securing our clients' products so they are secure and they have artifacts to prove it, and we can have a good pre-market approval process going through it. As to how I got into the Hscc part of it, I mean, I became aware of the Health Sector Coordinating Council with their initial release of the JSP, the Joint Security Plan. And as one of the best documents out there, it had a lot of credibility for me. I mean, a lot of these you read and they're not that great, but this was an excellent effort. And so that's when they first came on my radar. But even so, I've been developing medical equipment for 50 years as of this year. And both HDOs and MDMs have problems. But one of the biggest ones is they don't communicate. And not just about cybersecurity, about anything. Requirements, alarms, okay, harmonizing alarms. There's so many things wrong with that relationship that you would never see this as a customer and supplier relationship. And certainly cybersecurity was one of them. So this effort, I came into it late and kind of begged Greg to let me in, and he did. He was skeptical at first, but he let me in. And so I sort of took the role in the working groups as the Shakespearean fool, you know, the contrarian who, okay, you folks have been doing this for a year and a half. I'm going to come in and question everything you've done. And I think I did a good job of that, at least. I certainly threw stuff up and tried to question everything that went along. But I see this as an extremely important step in this communication improvement, certainly for cybersecurity. But there are so many other parts of this. I mean, Hscc and their listserv forums are a lovely example. In the 50 years I've developed medical equipment, I've never had such good communications with our customers. And it's like to see what their perspective is, to see what their needs are. If you're a manufacturer and you're not listening to what your customers want, how relevant are you going to be? How competitive are you going to be in the marketplace? So knowing what your customers want, providing that to them in an easy way is a huge competitive advantage in the marketplace today. And where I still see manufacturers who come to me and says, oh, we don't have to make the device secure. And it's like, and guess what? They've made a lot of other mistakes too. Right? So one of them is listen to your customers. In this case, for cybersecurity, I think it's a great first step. But this is how we're going to evolve this relationship and make this so it's a partnership between us. We always say this and talk about the shared responsibility, and it is. And both sides have done a lot of things wrong. I mean, nobody gets out of this without blame. But what we can do is we can save each other if we go in and work together on this. And that's the thing everybody looks at is almost adversarial in that relationship, and it's not. It shouldn't be. In too many cases, it is. But things like this first step for cybersecurity and normalizing it between our customers and the manufacturers, it's a great first step.
Thanks. And I'm Jason Smith. I'm the Senior Strategist for Communications and Marketing, also at Velentium, and I'm moderating this conversation, or at least attempting to. This is great. In your introductions, you guys have really delved a lot into my first question, which is about the purpose of the project and how this all got started. I did want to just clarify one thing. Chris mentioned that the working group has been at this for almost 2 years, but Michelle, I would say it was quite a bit earlier than that this originated, right? Before it came to the HSCC?
I did, yes.
About how long ago would you say that was?
So I think we met probably anywhere from 6 months to a year before that. The work that was done in that amount of time was taking the contracts from the 3 healthcare organizations and mirroring them up. So making sure we understood what things were we including that were the same, what things were outstanding, what things, in essence, how did they all tie to any guidance and regulations that was out there in the industry. And so doing some of that background work of at least getting a starting point from the HDO. And that actually woke up some folks when we did that presentation at Hscc. Because in a way it was intended as a starting point, and it came back almost like a finger point to the medical device vendors. And so it was very nice really quickly to, even though it was intended that we would open that door, we really didn't, the 3 organizations didn't have a path to do that at that point. And so it really was incredible when Greg approached us and said, you know, we've been doing this. We have the template in order to pull those different organizations together and open up that conversation for all, which was fabulous. And it did just that. I think that the conversation and the tone set in those meetings was extremely collaborative, good discussion, really opened the eyes of everybody participating, and everybody was on the same page. And I remember one individual in those meetings, not to call them out, even though I remember exactly who it was, said, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to let you do my contract negotiations from here on out," you know, because it was, once you break it down and have the understanding of what the logic is behind it, there really isn't a whole lot of discussion to have once you're on the same page and you see how it's being applied and everybody's speaking the same language. So it went a long ways. It took us 2 years within that group, but oh my goodness, a lot of bridges were stood up, a lot of collaboration to carry us through in all the other areas that we're going to need to face here going forward. So.
Yeah, and I would just to put the exact timing on it. It was the fall meeting of the ISAC summit of 2019. And in February of 2020 is when we had formally established the leadership of this task group. And then it formally launched. Its kickoff meeting was March 25th, 2020. So just less than 2 years, on March 3rd of this year is when we published the MC² document. Thanks in large measure to Michelle's leadership, Mayo Clinic, as well as Siemens and Premier. It's a great, she's right. It was a great collaborative effort. You know, I came on and you know, just like I saw in the financial services sector, disagreements between the banking industry and their telecommunications providers about who's responsible for cybersecurity, circular finger pointing. I was just seeing a lot of the same the same recriminations in the healthcare sector. And I was just so glad to see this model contract language bring together the stakeholders where they actually had mutual understanding. I mean, they listened to each other and they understood that there are myths about both sides held by the other, and that it's always a little bit more complicated than oversimplified. And so I think a lot of that mutual learning was very beneficial to developing a document here that is truly a consensus document.
If I could add on to that, Greg, what's interesting is that I want to call this out. A lot of the very specific discussion was heavy manufacturer leading the discussion, which really showed the buy-in and the need that this needs to be done. And so I really got to give them a ton of credit for that.
Yeah. And,
So-
and to the HDOs for getting it started, for really putting a structure around it.
So let's talk about those myths, Greg. Okay. There's a lot of them that are out there. And on the manufacturer side, one of which is where we speak of HDOs like it's this monolithic thing. HDOs. Well, the reality is you have organizations like Mayo, which are at the tip top of the scale of this. And then you have organizations as one hospital that I will not name that's in Ohio, where the guy who mows the lawn also is the guy who sets up their IT infrastructure. Right? And you've got everybody in between. This template that has come out of Hscc isn't for Mayo. While it was created by Mayo and others, it isn't for them. They've already had their language. They've had really good language for years out there. If you've ever gone out to their site and downloaded their guidances on that. But it's for everybody else. It's for all those rest of those ones, including the Ohio hospital down there, to address and put this into their contracts. So it's one of those myths out there that we think, oh yeah, everybody's going to be secure. Okay. You know, I can put my insecure medical device in Mayo because they have a secure network. Well, they have a more secure network, but they're not going to want your crappy insecure medical device in their network because that's how they got to be secure. So there's all these myths that rotate around out there that really get in the road of that relationship. So I think codifying this and these templates really, really helps.
So there was something else in there I wanted to touch on, which was, so this is coming out of the work that was being done by leading HDOs, and then it became this more kind of collaborative conversational effort. What were some of the biggest changes that got introduced as a result of either MDM perspective and input, or maybe from public sector perspective and input?
I'll go ahead and start, and then Chris, I may look to you and Greg to step in. Some of the main debate points, in my opinion, were around the SLAs that were introduced, timing, lining that stuff up with what's expected from, let's say, vulnerability disclosure. A lot of it was the words used, where some wording was loose and it could be interpreted in much different ways. And so some people are really good about picking apart the meaning of a word, making sure that it targets the intent. And so I think a lot of that discussion was centered on that. I didn't see a whole lot of this phrase just needs to be thrown out. The only time we got that was when it seemed duplicative, because of how we had it originally split into the 3 pillars, which were the performance, the design, and the maturity pillars that we had there. Overall, I think it was just making sure that the phrase was written to the intent and didn't have a whole lot and didn't have loopholes in it. Chris and Greg, I don't know if you want to add or disagree with me.
I'll hand it to Chris. I'm not as experienced on the substance from past experience. So Chris, you might expect.
Yeah, and I did, and again, I remember I came in as a contrarian. That was what I self.
I was going to say you came in a year and a half later.
Right, so I came
so you
in.
missed a lot of that fun.
Right, exactly. But I came in to say, why are you saying this and doing it this way? I remember there's one clause in there that calls out use of TLS. And I remember I pushed back on that and said, no, let's call this out to current best practices, which would be TLS 1.3. TLS alone just means I've got secondary questions now to ask. Really, is this 1.1? Is this 1.2? What are you mandating for integrity and encryption standards? When you go to 1.3, all those have been removed, all the weak ones. So currently, so there are things like that that I pushed back on. This is the perfect point to recognize that this is very much a living document, very much a living document. And while the working group has gone into this low duty cycle of meetings that we're in, we know in a year, 2 years, whenever Greg feels it's appropriate, we're going to punch this back up again and do a version 2. And from some of the feedback we've already received from the comment period, from people inside the group, from myself, from people external to the group, all of that, we're going to look at that and say, what do we need to do? What can we do a better job of? And hopefully we can get some vision and insight into how these clauses are being used. These are not tablets of jade, letters of gold. These are things to be used, okay, as a starting point for an organization. So some HDO might twist something a little bit, tweak it to their own level. Great. Which clauses are they using? Which ones are they modifying? What are they modifying? As we get more insight into that and how it's used in this time period, it will really help to inform our next effort on this as we bring it up to speed and tighten it up a little bit. I think this is a good first step because you have to get people into it. But I think that continuous improvement needs to be applied to it as well. So as we go forward, we are keeping at least pace with the industry, if not leading it.
I think some of that too. Oh, I'm sorry, Axel. I was just going to say that some of that too goes with how things change maybe within the FDA, whether things are guidance versus putting the foot down and saying, no, this is now required. I think that'll be a huge effort as well. And anybody want
to buy into the pool for the Patches Act? Because I think it's going to pass. Okay.
Axel, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted.
So no worries. So to Chris's point, in cybersecurity, nothing is ever static, not even a legal document, like a contract template like this one. We have changing standards on how you implement security. TLS is a good example for that. You have changing adversaries that sometimes can turn on a dime and can come up with a new attack. But also our healthcare infrastructure is rapidly changing. More things are interconnected, more things are moving out of the hospital into the patient's home or remote care centers. And those are all things that need to be addressed in the future. And I think it was Greg who made the point earlier that in the end, it's all about dialogue, right? To make sure that the device manufacturers and the buying healthcare organizations, pull on the same string. I think historically, we've had a view of the process, the purchasing process that basically said, okay, let's look at the purchase price and let's try to minimize that so that the HDO can buy as much as possible and the MDM can build it as cheap as possible, as low cost as possible to make maximum profit. I think that's, if you look at security, that is a very foolish approach because in security, there's a lot to be gained if you invest early during the design of a device, which saves a lot of money later on the side of the operator of the device. Right? So if you just look at the purchase price, you got a problem because you're going to try to push that price to the lowest possible point. Therefore, you maximize the post-market cost of security. And I think we collectively as an industry need to change our attitude and need to realize that any penny spent as early as possible in cybersecurity saves dollars later.
Not to go without saying, all of us understanding that there's a patient at the end of this, right? And so I know most all, and including Mayo Clinic, we do everything for the patient. The patient comes first. And so doing that investment up front that Axel is speaking of is in line with that.
And that brings me to a couple of more kind of high level or tone setting questions that I want to ask. And one of them is just a very basic point of clarification about how the model contract language is intended to be used. My understanding, and I'm coming at this, very much from an outsider's perspective, is that, as a template, it's maybe intended to get, the two parties 70 to 80% of the way, to to the place where they need to be, but they're going to have to do some customization and some tweaking, maybe some a la carte use of clauses or removal of clauses depending on their specific situation. Is that accurate, or?
It
Yeah.
is accurate. Mhm. Go ahead, Chris.
No, just totally agreeing with you, Michelle. Yeah, that's exactly the way it's going to be used. And the more insight we in the working group can get into how that's done, the better we can make the next version. Because we can start targeting and saying, wait a minute, look, nobody's ever using clause 13. I don't know what clause 13 is off the top of my head. But whatever it is, we can say nobody's ever using that. Why not? Is it worthless? Is it not? Does it not go far enough? Is there something wrong with it? Or everybody's using clause 44. I think that's the SBOM one. Okay. Well, now that's been mandated by government agencies, and now we're into this whole thing. Maybe that's why it's always being used. Okay. So we can start to look at this and get some real intelligence how we apply this going forward and make this, hone this more and more and more into where it should be in a real tool to be used by everyone.
Mhm. If you look at some of those clauses, there's some SLAs in there, and some of them are how soon an MDM will let an HDO know if there's a vulnerability or such like that. And if you think about the number of customers that MDM has, why would they want to renegotiate a different time with each of them? Some of that stuff should really be set and standard. And so this document, that's one example. This document really is that starting point where we've had a good group of representation come in and say, these sound wonderful. Now, are all their contracts written like that right now? No, but they've been spending a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money doing them individually. This is now saying, okay, let's start here. And now, depending on the type of technology, depending on the customer themselves, we may need to tweak some of this. Now, we know each one has their own legal representation, and they like to put their fingerprint on everything. So that's why there isn't that legal language that surrounds it and pulls it together. That they'll do themselves. But for the most part, that's the intent, is to give them that starting point, which is setting the expectation for an HDO to say, oh, it's okay to ask a vendor to do this, and the MDM to say, it's okay that the HDO is expected to do this piece. So great starting point, and I would agree, 70 to 80% of the way there.
But I recall discussions with some of the larger medical device manufacturers prior to 2019, where they literally had to build teams of dozens of people, and all they did was answer cybersecurity questions in contracts from customers, because every contract looked different and asked different questions. I did that out. And that, in my opinion, is a very, very poor way of spending cybersecurity money. Right? That's non-value added investment in cybersecurity. I'd rather spend it on more secure devices.
Yeah, both Michelle and Axel, you've both just pointed at two different examples of the way in which industry historically has been sort of penny wise and dollar foolish. One of them in the contract negotiation process, and the other one in the device design and development process itself, which is sort of a perfect segue into, again, some more high-level questions here. But I mean, what are the benefits specifically to HDOs for adopting the MC squared? And I want to throw this to Axel first, as I know you have some experience, sort of on both sides, but particularly on the HDO side.
Yeah, I think we made most of the points already, right? It is a question of maturity, right? Can each HDO actually ask the right cybersecurity questions? Do they have the expertise, the teams in place to articulate these correctly? And yes, Mayo has had their contract language for many, many years, but not every hospital out there, back to Chris's example from earlier, is Mayo Clinic. Right? Now, granted, risk profiles are also different. Mayo has a much higher exposure to cyber risk than an unknown hospital in in Ohio. So certainly it helps with that uneven distribution of cybersecurity expertise. Yeah, and then it's a time saver, right? I mean, every clause that is already defined, I don't have to hire lawyers to write them for me. So I think those would be the two main points that would come to mind, but I'm sure, Michelle, you have thoughts on that as well.
I absolutely agree. And we don't have to think about which items need to be included. Here is a basis to say, yes, we do want to make sure that we have put forth things in the contract that the MDM is held accountable for, which is having their own cybersecurity program and the way they conduct their business if they have connection to the HDO, but also in the design up front of that medical device. And for the HDO, it really, when it's the landscaper, like was discussed, that is also the security department, they too have that full awareness of what things should be included and what things they can expect if something should happen, that's all outlined. If there is an event or an episode that happens, that they need to call on the MDM for help and such. So it really is reducing the amount of work up front that you would need to engage in with each of the vendors significantly, because you have this starting point now. It's making sure everybody is aware and much more understanding of what that language is and what those accountabilities are for both sides. And it definitely points to the collaboration and the partnership that must be there when we're buying medical devices from an MDM. Having that dialogue that Chris spoke about earlier is key.
Oh boy, I can't agree more. And in fact, where I see this hopefully is going to go is it's not only going to raise awareness at the HDOs that this is important. So during pre-procurement, before you go out and buy something, this now starts to be thought about. Well, but the contract says we should have these kind of services. We should have these kind of technical mitigations in place. Maybe this will raise some awareness there. And then that in turn will force the medical device manufacturers to meet that. And the ones who are going to be the successful MDMs are the ones who are going to exceed that. And they understand this is their marketplace. We can get into it. We can give them this up front and provide this. And this is going to be a competitive advantage. And nothing gets implemented faster than a competitive advantage. All right. So that's what I hope to see, that evolution in that come about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So okay. So these are really good benefits to the tool, and I think we design a good tool for something of which we previously had no tool. Great. We're in a really good position. What about the content of the model contract, as far as some of the specific suggestions or recommendations that are contained in it? What would you point to as being some some things that you expect to see adopted frequently because they just, the benefits are just so clear, or things that maybe need to be highlighted because the benefits are not intuitive? And
let me jump into this, because I was the one being the contrarian. I wanted to push it, right? I would say all of the clauses call out in the form of technical mitigations. It maybe not even current best practice, very relaxed, easy to implement, should have been just a gimme that was already there. And it's like, if it's not, this is not like we're pushing the envelope on this at all. Okay. Some of the service parts of it and what their expectations are of the HDO, maybe a little bit. I mean, but that should have already been there, the stuff that they're asking for, quite honestly. None of this is really like they're asking for the moon. This is stuff that you as a manufacturer should already have had in place and already be considering it. So where we get grumbling coming back from this are people who are definitely not one of the, Siemens Healthineers, for instance, or Philips or Baxter or Medtronic or any of these leading lights that are in security. They're trying to do their best. these are some of the other 10,000 registered device manufacturers who are thinking they don't have to do anything. And so this is also going to be a bit of a wake-up call for them. Some of them still won't listen because, well, all you have to do is look around our country today and you'll understand. There's people who believe that they don't have to do anything. Well, that's true, but then people don't have to buy your product either. And so this is, I think, really going to be, at least for the ones who are honestly ignorant of this, not in some sort of a religious fervor over, I don't have to do anything you want me to do. But instead, one's just, I really didn't know this was needed. And I run into those folks, by the way, all the time. Okay. And my question is, how have I missed you? I talk everywhere. How have I missed you? Right. And it's like, I try to get this word out, but still you miss these people. So they don't know they need this. So things like this that are related to sales of the product definitely will get more penetration into the MDM and hopefully get more of their awareness going.
Yeah, and you know, a word about sort of the process behind this, because, you know, we say, and we will say accurately, that it is a consensus document, which is everything that the Sector Coordinating Council produces is consensus within the membership. Now, I cannot say we represent the entire healthcare sector. We represent 320 of some of the largest and most influential healthcare entities across the various subsectors. So it's certainly consensus among some of the biggest stakeholders in the HDO and MDM community. And what's good about this document, as with any of our documents and in most industry association, coalition activities, is you need to follow a certain protocol for making sure that that everybody has a say in the final product. And so after 18 months of work, this task group, which consisted of about 30 organizations, from HDOs, MDMs, group purchasing organizations, some consulting and servicing organizations, took 18 months to finish this. Once it's finished, the task group approves it as a final draft. It goes to the full cybersecurity working group, all 320 organizations, for a review and feedback comment period, which typically lasts about 2 weeks. In this case, it was about 2 weeks with a little bit of spillover. And then we go about the process of adjudicating the comments. All the comments are entered onto a spreadsheet on a share drive that is open to the membership of the Sector Coordinating Council. And the comments are there for all to see. When the comment period closes, the task group leadership sets about to adjudicate those comments. And we received 156 substantive and editorial comments from more than a dozen organizations who took the time to read this extensive document. And it took the leadership weekly meetings through the wintertime to discuss and adjudicate all of these, and as necessary to go back and ask the particular commenter what he or she meant, and made sure that we had mutual understanding about why we would accept it with modifications, or why we would decline that particular edit. And by the end of that process, in early March, we put it out one more time as a heads up that we're about to publish this. And on March 3rd, it was published without objection. So in that sense, from an organizational standpoint, it was consensus, and we want to be able to use the bully pulpit of some of these large companies that Chris is referring to really help raise the awareness across the sector, particularly the MDM sector, about the importance of better uniformity and coherence in the contracting process. And hopefully a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, so let's explore that a little bit, because so we've talked about, I mean, I think it's very clear from the conversation so far, the big advantages to the HDOs, but why are the MDMs so interested? I mean, why did they come to participate? What is it that they're looking for, and then what do they get out of you know, kind of coming to the table, not just with the tool, but also, you know, negotiation by negotiation? Why should they adopt?
I think Chris said it certainly earlier. It's like, you know, an MDM has how many customers, and every customer is sending a different set of questions and demands on security. Well, what if that were made more uniform, so that it is, we have an easy guide for the HDOs, common terms for the MDMs, more common terms for the MDM, and therefore it reduces time, cost, and complexity associated with contract negotiation.
I mean, similar to the point we made earlier about the different maturity levels of different HDOs or hospitals, the same can be said about device manufacturers, right? Not everybody has highly trained security staff on, you know, on their teams, and therefore having even obvious things spelled out in the contract, like don't use hard-coded passwords, use proper authentication, authorization, provide an SBOM. You know, those are all things that are critical if you look at the spectrum of capabilities across the device manufacturer space, right? I think that's one important statement. The other one is that there are also a lot of things in the contract language that, let's say, I would call motivating. But there's one clause in there which talks about the cost responsibility as a consequence of a breach, and take on you know, credit reporting and monitoring and patient notification costs by the manufacturer if, you know, indeed the event was due to a security weakness of the device. You know, that clause is not only a good clause in the sense that it defines who is responsible for what financially, but I think it's also a good clause that is highly motivating to improve vulnerability management and patch turnaround times. Because once you're notified about a vulnerability, the quicker you fix it, the lower your legal and financial exposure.
But I would amplify what Axel said is if you're a company that doesn't have cybersecurity expertise, you should seek that out someplace like Axel's company, MedCrypt, or my company, Velentium. Throw that out there. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help you and help you through those things. There's a huge shortfall of cybersecurity people for embedded cybersecurity. They're just non-existent. That's why we train everybody. So this is, you know, it's expected to have that in a startup, especially MDM. Seek out the experts, have them help you, have them assist you.
Let's turn the corner a little bit. So how well does the MC² play with the kind of ongoing rash of regulations and standards and you know, these updates that keep happening? And in particular, I mean, you know, we released this, and what, 2-3 weeks later, the FDA comes out with its long-awaited pre-market guidance update. So, what work? I guess so. My question falls into two parts. One is, what work does the cybersecurity working group foresee as far as keeping this up to date with regulation, which is always a moving target, but also, when HDOs and MDMs are looking to adopt this tool now in its current form, what kind of work should they expect to need to do as far as keeping an eye on regulation and integrating that into the contract?
Well, first of all, the document doesn't refer any specific version of a regulation, right? It refers generically to the current FDA pre-market guidance. And even though we got a very comprehensive document 2 weeks ago from the FDA, legally we're still at the status of the 2014 pre-market guidance, because that's the only one that is not in draft status. Now, the latest one points in the direction of the FDA's thinking, and every medical device manufacturer out there should take it quite serious, because it is clear now what is coming, and that is very specific and raises the bar significantly. But until this document, this most recent document, becomes final, the stake in the ground is still the 2014 pre-market guidance.
I would also just add at a higher level about the work of the cyber working group in relation to FDA and the regulatory environment, the guidance environment. We have as sort of a foundational document of the cyber working group, the Medical Device and Health IT Joint Security Plan. And that was, again, an effort that was published in January of 2019. It was an effort co-chaired by the Mayo Clinic, by Becton Dickinson, and by the FDA. And the idea behind that document was to develop a program, how MDMs can develop a program for designing and developing manufacturing cybersecurity into medical devices from the ground up, through a whole life cycle program. And in that foundational document, which again was co-chaired by FDA, it's not a joint seal, it's not a joint brand, but they stand by that. And while it's not an official documentation, the FDA regularly is promoting the use of the Joint Security Plan wherever they go in public settings to speak. They talk about the Joint Security Plan and its consistency, its alignment with pre-market guidance and the general philosophy behind FDA's cybersecurity program. But in that document are certain points to be made about, among other things, model contracts. So it gave a very high level, here's a few thoughts that you ought to include. You ought to be prepared as an MDM to include in your contract. And it also had language about we need to be thinking about how to manage as a shared responsibility legacy medical devices that have not had security built into them, and now they're aging at 15 or 20 or 25 years on the operating room floor or whatever. And that was high level. And so we decided that we would take on the legacy device and the model contract language out of the JSP and create full-on task groups around them. And the legacy device task group, still working on their product, is also co-chaired by the FDA. And in a way to try to align an industry consensus document with a government regulatory document, but not with strict linkage. And so the legacy device task group, as it's been working, has in a way in process been informing the model contract language task group and vice versa, so that they can link up together. And when you think about a contract language and about what commitments you're going to be making in the future about managing this device, you can refer back to the legacy device task group work product to say, what does that specifically mean? And FDA believes that these are well aligned with what they are trying to accomplish, including our third document, which also aligns with FDA and not just about to be published, probably on April 18, the Vulnerability Communications Toolkit, about how we can better communicate to patients what a particular vulnerability in a medical device means to them. And this is very closely aligned to what FDA has been trying to do with their Patient Engagement Advisory Committee, the PEAC, to talk about how to keep consumers of medical devices, wearables, implantables, aware of and cognizant and having some control over their own devices, so that they understand what cyber vulnerabilities mean and what they don't mean. Anyway, that's a long answer.
And for those who are paying attention to initiatives in our industry, it's a very different approach, and has to be, than say what the software bill of materials folks are doing with VEXs, which are machine readable vulnerability statements. Those are meant to be consumed by an HDO who has tens of thousands of medical devices and needs an automated way of looking at it. And it's a highly technical, highly pointed way of letting those people determine their own risk appetite. What Greg's talking about is end users and giving them a JSON file, not going to be the solution. Okay, it's not. A lot of hand-holding, a lot of assumption of no technical knowledge or terminology and how to express it to them. Very difficult things to do.
All right, well, we are well through my set of initial discussion questions, and we are coming up on the hour. I think I sort of want to just open the floor and say, is there anything that you've been chomping at the bit to talk on or touch on that we haven't talked about yet? And if so, let's talk about it.
I guess one thing I can think of is part of your last question was going forward and how do we intend on doing that? And I think we've hit on it as part of answers to other questions, which is we need time for people to use what we've put together. And so that's the intent. We are still meeting. We're kind of dividing, trying to determine a proper cadence to keep in touch with what's going on, make sure that we are positioned to take input and go through a review process again. It will most likely be at the end of the year to have that full year of usage of the document and how we'll be doing that. So it is a living document, as everyone on the call has said, and we will continue to stay abreast of what's going on in the industry, but making this document usable and not to a point where it locks us in and it's no good to anybody. And so that was the tool that we built, was to make sure that we would have a usable tool.
And to be specific about that, I would urge viewers to go to our website, healthsectorcouncil.org. Under the recommendations tab, the first document that appears at the top of the list is the MC squared, MedTech cybersecurity contract language. In that document is a link for readers, for users to provide feedback. So as Michelle said, this is a living document and we need to hear, we need to measure what's being used, how it's being used, why it wasn't being used, and that will inform version 2. I mentioned the Medical Device Joint Security Plan, the JSP. We are just now launching the task group to embark on version 2 of the JSP. It's now 3 years old. We have feedback on its use, and we are going to revisit and update the JSP2 just as we anticipate to do so in the next year or so of the MC squared. If you would like to participate in that process, on our website is a contact link that will end up in my inbox, and you can inquire about membership. And you don't have to be a medical device manufacturer. The Health Sector Council is open to any organization that is a covered entity or a business associate under HIPAA. You're regulated by the FDA or by the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT, by CMS as a payer. So we cover all the subsectors of the healthcare industry, and it's important to have a cross-sector view of issues as cross-cutting as this one, the model contracts or JSP, legacy devices, or many others. So we welcome new members. There is no cost to join other than sweat equity. All of this is done by a coalition of the willing, by those thought leaders and expert practitioners who want to bring their expertise and experience to the table and offer it up to the rest of the community.
And let me echo what Greg just said. The Hscc is an excellent organization. They're actually going in and targeting a moonshot kind of things to who would have said this, 2-3 years ago, that we're going to try to normalize the business relationship between HDOs and MDMs. I mean, this is like wading into a giant nightmare. And so this is the kind of stuff they do. And Greg's not afraid to take on these big tasks and organize these groups to get everybody involved. One negative, we need more people. 10,000 medical device manufacturers registered with the FDA. Why are we seeing the same 10, 20, 30 companies? Get involved, learn about this, help me take this to the next level. At least be aware of what your needs are going to be for your organization in the coming years by staying current and on the edge with organizations like Hscc. So I'm very, very happy to be in their working groups, and I think they're doing a huge service to both HDOs and MDMs.
And quickly back to a point Greg was making earlier about, the whole bunch of documents that is out there, the JSP, the model contract language, and even things like the FDA guidance, right? None of this is at this point enforceable standard or enforceable law, but it is a very good way on how to solve a very complex problem and how to move the industry forward. It's a well-recognized best practice where many people, including the people on this call here, have put a lot of good thought in it and have shared with the larger community on how to actually address these complex problems.
Well, and since they refer to it as MC squared, I'm going to say that the working groups have a lot of kinetic energy in them. It's a relativity comment there. It is, though, but they do have a lot of energy. And contrast this to what Axel was talking about. IEEE working groups that I've been in, or ISO, oh my God, ISO works. I mean, these are, I'd say it's like a glacier, but they're slower than glaciers. They take forever. I've been in the Bluetooth SIG working groups where we will debate for months, 1 or 2 bits that in the communications. And it's like, it's ridiculous. The Hscc doesn't have that. They're not lethargic. They move. Things get done. We actually look at things and comment on it. Like, we only got to 3 of the main topics on this hour this week. And it's like, we've got to do better. And it's like, and then we do. So very energetic, much more lively than something like an ISO standard group. That being said, Axel's totally right in the sense that those are real standards. They're enforced by countries. They are used like for MDRs and that sort of thing, so as opposed to consensus standards. But the consensus standard can be a great place to start with your journey if you're brand new to cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I call this soft policy in a way. I mean, Axel is right. This is not enforceable law. This is industry best practices.
Right.
And if we don't do it, those impatient legislators and regulators will. And that's not always going to be the best outcome. I said at the start of this, that we are critical infrastructure. And if we are critical infrastructure, then we are performing a public service. If we are performing a public service, we are therefore, to some extent, public servants. I don't care if you're for profit or not for profit. We are dealing with public health and safety. As Michelle said, this is about patient safety. You can't have patient safety without cyber safety anymore. So this is a responsibility of a critical infrastructure sector, including, those 10,000 small to mid-sized MDMs out there who might not be paying close enough attention. They have a responsibility to this. This is as much about quality as it is about cybersecurity, because cybersecurity is also quality now. So I think we are all coming together under that general principle that we provide a public service, and that public service is to ensure patient safety, and it's our responsibility. So I think that's a motivating factor for everyone who is working in this organization, and for everyone who ought to be working in this organization. So we certainly encourage, as Chris said, get involved, join the Sector Coordinating Council, and we will welcome you.
All right. We will give our panelists a couple of moments to get refreshed and reset, and then we will go through questions. And for those of you who joined a little bit after the top of the hour, I will just mention that I see a lot of you have figured out the chat function. That's a great place to put your questions. Thanks for doing that. During the video, you can continue to use that, and I will read these out and we'll discuss. All right, I want to start with Richard's question. Are MDMs required to provide vulnerability disclosure reports to customers following NIST SP 800-161 R1 guidelines?
So picking up the conversation where we left it off there, consensus standards and regulatory standards, big difference between the two, okay? Regulatory standards have force of law behind them. So for those of you in the medical device industry, for instance, if you said, I'm a medical device manufacturer, I don't need ISO 13485, which is the quality management system. And you would go, you know, what? What do you mean you don't need 1345? As long as you don't market in the EU, you don't. It's not currently, that's in the process of changing, by the way, requirement for the United States. So you have to make a distinction between these two. Usually regulatory standards are very slow, very lethargic. Consensus standards usually have more energy or faster, and they're covering areas that other standards aren't covering, whether they haven't been fast enough to respond to changing conditions, or they're just areas that haven't been addressed so far. So I like consensus standards, but we have to realize they're a thing that should ultimately be codified as a requirement standard. Okay, it is a great leading way to lead into this thing, but ultimately that's its arc of its lifespan. Why do I go into this huge rant? It always upsets me when somebody sees one of these consensus standards like NIST 800-161, which by the way is supply chain. For those who don't know it, it's 280 pages of NIST love, all about how to secure your supply chain. I don't have that kind of time to read the document, quite honestly. Hscc has a much shorter and much better is a bad definition, but I like it better because you can read it. It's shorter and it has things like what you should be asking your vendors. But NIST is very thorough, as it always is. So the answer is no. We don't have to provide vulnerability under NIST 800-161. But we do have to inform our customers under the 2016 post-market cybersecurity guidance document from the FDA. That does have force of law under the FDA for post-market surveillance. And so we do have to do it, but it has absolutely nothing to do with NIST. You can inform them in a lot of different ways, including using ISOs like HISAC or MedISO, both good ISOs that are out there. Those are very good organizations to help you inform your customers and provide disclosures of this. You even have timeframes of 30 and 60 days that occurs because of that post-market guidance. So, but NIST, no, we are not required to follow NIST at all.
I would add to that, obviously total agreement with Chris, but what we've been trying to do in the Sector Coordinating Council is to try to bring some uniformity to the way that we report vulnerabilities, how we communicate them to our customers or to MDM customers. So we have a vulnerability communications task group, and all the folks on this call have been working on that. And in fact, I'll put in the chat the most recent publication of the Vulnerability Communications Task Group just earlier this month, or actually last month, that tries to provide a sort of a common nomenclature for how we communicate vulnerabilities to the patient audience. So when you know you have a vulnerability, you start getting into technical information. You have different audiences that you need to reach. You need to reach the patients, the elder folks who are using implantables or glucose monitoring devices, et cetera, that can't decipher complex technical cybersecurity information. So we're doing a number of iterations of a vulnerability communications standardization or uniformity toolkit. So this was just published last month for the patient audience, and we've just now embarked on the next tranche, which is to standardize the way we communicate to the HDO community, specifically the technical audience, the chief information security officers, the biomedical engineers, in the more technical and operational functions of a hospital organization or clinic. and trying to drive that nomenclature and common processes so that ultimately the audience is not going to have to decipher different terminologies, different phrasings, et cetera, and that we will try to reduce as much as possible the amount of confusion that can often, or FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that goes along with things like vulnerability communications.
And lastly, to add to that, if you look at the post-market guidance Greg was just talking about, there is a significant regulatory relief in the post-market guidance if you report through an ISAC or ISAO with regards to cybersecurity vulnerabilities as compared to having to report to the FDA. So it is not mandatory under NIST, as the initial question was, but it is certainly a significant advantage to the manufacturer to participate.
It's actually more like a threat if you read it. It's thou shalt belong to an ISAO or else we're going to come down hard on you. I mean, that's the paraphrasing. It was actually the hardest guideline I've ever seen come out of the FDA. It was really, really pointed in the sense that you should do it that way. So yeah, by the way, it's interesting. Just to give you an idea, what Greg touched on there was he talked about CGM, continuous glucose monitoring. Not only do you have to communicate to these patients, but things like diabetics, depending upon their blood sugar level, they could be compromised in their ability to understand what they're reading. Literally, cognitive disability is a thing because you know you're dealing with a medical victim here who has some ailment that you have to work with. So how do you put it, not just in normal simple terms, but in really basic terms, that somebody that might be compromised because of blood sugar levels, for instance, or other means, is going to have trouble understanding. So comprehension, it's a tough job.
There's a comment here from Ali that I'm not too keen to work with an MDM that refuses to provide an updated MDS2, SBOM, etc. Just reacting to the idea that how the MDM, or if the MDM responds to security questions and requirements from an HDO is indicative of their maturity. To maybe spin that into a question, I mean, how, I guess, what is the time horizon that you all see? I mean, at some point, HDOs are going to stop buying from MDMs that can't prove their security posture, and I think we're actually probably a lot closer to that event horizon than maybe some manufacturers are aware of. What do you all think about how far away that is, and how gradually do we get there, or is it going to feel very sudden to some folks?
The horizon's here. Interestingly and humorously, at this moment, I've got in the HISAC listserv, I've got a question out, and we're trying to do a survey for all the HDOs to see how many of them include cybersecurity considerations in pre-procurement activities. And so I want to know for the medical device industry, but I can tell you at large, late last year, Finite State did a survey on this and found that 59% of the manufacturers of devices, not just medical devices, but devices, have found that they feel that they are losing sales because of security questions that their customers are asking and that they're not passing on. 59% lost sales. So this is already happening. What is it for our little neck of the woods here in medical device? Don't know yet. Trying to figure that out, as a matter of fact, to HISAC. But we'll see as we go forward what that kind of penetration looks like. I know from the MDM side, a lot of people feel it's 100% now. And it's like, so it's that many. It's definitely over half at this point. What that real number is, though, it'll be interesting to see.
So we have a couple of questions from before, and I'm going to group a few of these in a moment. But before I get to those set of related questions, with this one, what are some key sections of the MC² that you would recommend be highlighted to busy decision makers, such as executives? Or is it the whole thing is golden and they really need to read it all?
It's only 45 clauses. This isn't a NIST document. This is an approachable document.
I think one of the helpful things as part of the documentation might be the chart, the fundamental template that we used in order to build the clauses. So it has the pillars there with each of the areas defined and why the value that each of those sections brings. So if they wanted a quick summary, it would be, you know, the first section of that. However, the 45 clauses really do break down and read quickly. And I think it'd be healthy to read through all of them and be familiar with that.
If you're going to commit your organization to anything in a contract, you need to know what's in the contract. So you can't say you're too busy to understand what you're committing your company to. Obviously, this tool is not a requirement. It is tailorable to every organization, but it's certainly a great place to start. And any executive involved in the contracting process will not be doing their job if they don't know what is in the contract.
I'm going to try to answer the question a little more directly than the rest of us who've kind of run around the edges of this one, but there are some great things in there, and stuff that sticks in my head are things like the manufacturer disclosing to the HDO all of the ways to authenticate to this device. So they may have like field service personnel, or they may have an external backend server that's phoning in. All of these holes are being exposed. Things like software bill of materials, SBOMs, you know, they're everywhere these days, right? The communications and ongoing support that's going to be performed between the MDM and the HDO. And so I think those are some of the things that stick out in my mind as the most important of it, which is humorous because the people know that worked with me on that group, I always focused on the technical details, but the reality is it's more the relationship that I think are really interesting there, as Michelle's alluded to several times in the presentation.
And I'd like to tack on to that, because you're absolutely right, Chris, but there's going to be a really important part of that, that if that MDM is going to be providing remote support and such, there really is the expectation that the HDO would be made aware of the security program of the MDM and how they conduct their business working together, because of the tie and the potential of expanding that landscape of threats.
Right. Yeah, remote desktop just doesn't cut it anymore.
No.
Okay. Oh, I'm going to use TeamViewer. Good luck.
All right, we have several questions that have to do with very recent and or pending legislation and regulation, and I think we can sort of open floor and talk about these and the things that we see on the horizon from regulators. But two things that have been brought up specifically are Executive Order 14028 and the way that it deals with questionnaires versus vendor attestations. And then also requirements having to do with reporting of cyber incidents to CISA with the law that President Biden signed in March. So I'll take it away. There's a lot to talk about there, and yeah, I'll let you be the judge of where
Well, on the CISA reporting, I mean, but my reading of it, I mean, first off, they need to go through the rulemaking process, which when you stretch it all out in the text, it will be 3.5 years before the final regulations are out. But as the law is written, as I understand it, this applies to critical infrastructure. And currently, the healthcare industry is considered critical infrastructure by CISA, and therefore HDOs, MDMs, pharma would anyone that's classified in the healthcare infrastructure, and that may need to be specific. That will need to be specifically defined by CISA, but that reporting requirement does apply. Versus the Securities and Exchange Commission ruling that recently came out that it similarly applies reporting, but for publicly traded companies. So obviously in the HDO community, you have You have hundreds, thousands of hospital systems that are nonprofit, that are not publicly traded, and they would not be subject to those reporting requirements under SEC, but they would as if they were defined as critical infrastructure. But the devil will be in the details. If there's a small, 15-bed critical care system hospital, somewhere in rural America, would they be required? That remains to be seen.
That being said, you have a long list of alphabet organizations. Who do you really want them to come down on you? I mean, what is the penalties to be paid? We just saw here today a Colonial Pipeline just pulled up $1 million fine because of how they handled their problem, even though they were ransomware victims. For those who have heard me speak before, I talk about them as co-conspirators. They created the environment in which it was possible for this to occur, the ransomware. So they just pulled a fine because of that. So you better start thinking about it as you're an organization. It's trying to split hairs and say, oh, we're not really covered here. Even if technically at this moment you're not, you probably will be shortly. This is all moving in the same direction. Notice the fact where everything is going, get yourself together and realize that we all have a responsibility to be good corporate citizens.
One of the rulemaking requirements, to Chris's point about the alphabet soup, is that one of the rulemaking requirements is that Hscc, in cooperation with other regulatory agencies, need to do a crosswalk to see where there are duplicative, overlapping, or conflicting reporting regulations, such as HIPAA. Cybersecurity breach, data breach under HIPAA has to be reported. How do we deconflict? How do we reconcile that reporting requirement with what would be a Hscc reporting requirement? So that, again, 3.5 years of rulemaking process will have to sift through those questions about duplicative reporting, because ultimately the intent is that we do not add reporting and compliance burden on particularly hospital systems, HDOs that are stretched to their limits financially, and to add a compliance function, a whole compliance office that has to report to 3 or 4 different agencies when a cyber event happens. That isn't doing anything to improve their cybersecurity posture. It's only imposing a punitive structure, a punitive costs to their operations.
If only we had a public-private health sector council that coordinated all this. Oh, wait, we do.
I do want to come back just slightly again to this question about Executive Order 1428, or this note, and vendor attestations versus questionnaires, and it kind of opens up the whole supply chain question, right? And I mean, is there what do you think can be done, or is there a trend that you see towards more of a self-conception for all of us in this relationship as links in the supply chain, from components to patients, right? Somewhere in that process is each of these organizations, and we've been focusing on HDOs and MDMs particularly, but where do you see kind of that mindset around security shifting as people kind of start to realize how interconnected we are in this, in the chain, as opposed to just thinking of ourselves as, well, I'm, a dot on a map, and I'm, networked, and I'm selling devices to these healthcare organizations, or I'm just a hospital in a location and I'm buying different devices from these different things. And it, that sort of kind of more spaghetti model of looking at it versus this kind of more linear chain with the concerns that come with that.
If I may, I guess when I read this question, I go back to thinking about the risk assessments that we did in our organization and gathering the information from the MDMs. So I agree that the customers or the HDO should be all receiving the same information. But to go with the vendor at a station at this point, I'm not sure how that plays in, because to me, I believe what should be received is the SBOM, which gives the information to the healthcare organization to be able to, number one, know the technology in their environment and how to react as certain threats are occurring. So it may not just be a vulnerability with the device itself, but let's look at Log4j. How do we know where Log4j is in our environment unless we have, some of those specifics? So this really is a partnership. It's not HDO against MDM, give me information against you. It's we are here to serve a patient. Let's work together and share information so that our communication lines are very quick, and the ability to communicate and address any issue that comes up is there. And the other thing too that I was thinking just real quick is that this would be okay if we were in a place where all medical devices were supported the same way. If they were built, for instance, on Microsoft platform and Patching Tuesday was that, we don't want to do that. I agree with you, Chris. Bad example. But my point is, we don't have that flexibility, and medical devices are not maintained the same way with the same expectations. And so I think you need that library now on how to support each and every one of them, or how they are supported, to make sure that we have the means to address something quickly if need be.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. We are at time. So I want to just say thank you all very much for being here. Greg, Michelle, Axel, Chris. Thank you to those who joined us today, and we'll give a shout out to those who will watch this in the future. Thanks, everybody. Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So everybody,
Thank you.
good to be here.